Today we're going to talk about why GDP is fake. Now, we've all heard the economists say, and all over the news and every other big media, that the economy is growing and that we're somehow more productive than ever. Yet, if you look around, if you've been paying attention, if you've heard of de-industrialization, you know that we produce almost nothing. So how can we be more productive while producing absolutely nothing? That's just fucking retarded. The jobs we've got today, as I told you about one of the other previous episodes, or whatever you want to call these, the jobs we've all gotten nowadays are all just shit jobs at Kroger or Amazon. These jobs don't actually produce anything, if you notice. They just move shit around that's already been produced. So any logical, sane person would be able to see that just moving shit around doesn't actually produce any real value. You know, it's not productive. I mean, sure, stuff still needs to get moved around because we don't have teleportation, but it doesn't produce anything. It's just a requirement to get something from where it is to where it's needed. GDP counts as part of the economy, the value, in quotations, of moving stuff around. The so-called service economy that they've all been talking about for the past 40 years. That was somehow supposed to be better than what we had before, all the real jobs producing everything. Yet, if you're alive, you know that's not the fucking case. Now, suppose you want a chair from China. And we're going to simplify things, okay? Because money is just a stand-in for stuff, right? That's why it was invented, you know, to take the place of trading goods for goods and barter systems. That's where it first evolved. So money kind of obscures the truth here, okay? So let's say in this world, everything's the same except money doesn't exist. You can only trade stuff for stuff. And suppose you want a chair from China. They'll only trade goods for goods. What are you going to give them? You see, you work retail, let's say, because that's what our economy mostly is now. Retail and warehouse jobs and stuff that just move shit around. And you get paid in stuff because everybody's paid in stuff because that's just how we're supposing it is, replacing money with stuff. Now, where does the store get its stuff? Now, it pays you in stuff to ring up people's stuff. But where do they get their goods, their real stuff from? From customers? Sure. Yeah, customers can trade their stuff for other stuff from the store. And where do the customers get their stuff? What, from their retail jobs? But then where do those retail jobs get their stuff to pay them? From customers again? You notice that just forms a bunch of loops and branches into more loops. There's nowhere where you actually get to where the stuff is made in this economy, and that's because this economy doesn't work. And you can see that if you replace money with stuff. And the only reason this stuff really exists in this example is because we've presupposed it to exist, because it's basically been left over from before de-industrialization occurred. Now, in this example, stuff is pushed and pulled around. Okay, it's moved back and forth, it's pushed and pulled around, but it's never actually produced anywhere. There's an analogy here that I can make. There's something in electronics where stuff is pushed and pulled around, where power is pushed and pulled back and forth, but it's never actually used in the component. This is called reactance. It's similar to resistance. You see, reactance is similar to resistance. In fact, they both account for, together, something called impedance. You see, when you get to AC systems, as opposed to DC, resistance becomes two-dimensional. You have the real resistive component, in which power that passes through it is actually used in some way. In a simple resistive load, it gets turned into heat. And you can think of this as like an old-fashioned light bulb. You also have reactive components, capacitive inductives. And a capacitor is continuously charged and discharged back into the grid every cycle, every time the wave goes up and down. Now, power still has to flow through the lines to get to the capacitor, but this power is stored in the capacitor is discharged as the wave cycle falls. So the capacitor never actually uses any electrical power. Same to some extent for an inductor, although, you know, this kind of requires a perfect inductor, so, you know, but in an inductor, what happens is as the power flows through it, it charges up a magnetic field around it, and then as the cycle comes back down and crosses to zero, that magnetic field collapses and the energy stored in it goes back into the grid. Now with both of these, like your capacitive inductive loads, none of the power that goes into them is actually ever used. with the resistive load, it ends up as heat or something else. Like I said, these two combine together, resistance and reactance combine together to impedance, but they don't add and they don't subtract in the regular way that you would think. It's actually two-dimensional. You can think of resistance as going left and right on a 2D plane, and reactance goes up and down. Well, it seems to me that we have jobs that when effort is put into them, you get a real output, and you have jobs when effort is put into them, there isn't a real output, so to speak. Now, that's not to say they aren't jobs and they aren't work in the sense that they don't take any effort. It's just that you don't get a product out. You don't get anything useful really out of it. I mean, they're only useful in the sense to help the other things be produced. Here's another way to think about it. An economy wants, in quotations, to produce more televisions and radios, let's say, because everybody wants those. But an economy doesn't want, so to speak, to just move stuff around for no reason. That doesn't get you anything. And here's another thing to add on to that. Why should a chair cost any more or any less to make in America versus China? I mean, I know they say, oh, but they are paid less there. But let's talk about it in like real units. Let's leave money out of it. So hours it takes to put together a chair, wood and screws. It's going to take the same either way, whether it's made in America or China. In fact, if you were an American wanting to buy a Chinese chair, it actually takes more resources because now you have to burn a bunch of oil to move the chair over here. What's interesting is that not all countries in the past have actually used GDP, even relatively recently, to measure their economies. Now, I know the Soviets fucked up a lot of things, and the main one being central planning, of course, but Soviets had something called net material product. They didn't actually use GDP to determine the worth of their economy, how it was growing. So the Soviets only counted the productive portion of work as part of their economy. The production of chairs, light bulbs, television sets, radios, steel, soap, wheat, bread, milk, all that counted, but the jobs that were needed in distributing these at stores, moving these around at warehouses, they didn't count those. Those were costs to them, essentially, just costs. Now, what's interesting is that net material product, NMP for short, was always about 75% of what the calculated GDP was in the case of the USSR. You know, during the USSR's entire lifetime, they produced stuff. I'm not going to say they produced it the best way or whatever, but they produced stuff. During the U.S.'s industrial age, the economy grew about like 7 to 9, let's say 8% a year. Now, what's interesting now is GDP, after de-industrialization here in America, growth in GDP per year is only about 2 to 3%. Well, 2% is 25% of 8, isn't it? Now, and some people will say, but the economists have big degrees. They wrote lots of books. They studied for this. But you know what? Soviet economists had degrees. They wrote books. They went to university. It doesn't mean shit, does it? Because all the universities were set up and funded by the people who wanted to stay in power. And I'm sure plenty of these economists did believe what they were saying was correct and what they studied was correct. But that doesn't make it so. You know, the Soviet economists did the same shit that our economists are doing. They said that, oh, all's good, you know, it all works, and don't question the word of Lenin or whatever. You know, they worship central planning basically the same way free trade is worshipped over here. Just dogmatically believed. Well, that'll be all for today.